Hey friends, Lucian here with the Bullish Bears team. Wanted to make this video on the falling window pattern, otherwise known as a gap down. So gaps are also known as windows. So I'm going to read you the definition, then show you some real world patterns like we like to do, because everything is most important in the real world and what it looks like on real charts. Gaps. So gaps are areas on a chart where the price of a stock or other financial instrument moves sharply up or down with little or no trading in between. As a result, the assets chart shows a gap in the normal price action. And you can kind of, you know, keep reading down and read more. So many of times it's due to news, good news or bad news, and then the stock kind of breaks or jumps up from the previous close or breaks down from the previous close, and forms a gap on a chart. And those gaps, which you will see, are extremely important support and resistance areas that traders pay very close attention to. There's a saying in the industry, again, nothing's 100%, but there's a saying that basically says all gaps must be filled. Now it's just a matter of when, right? Many of times the percentages and the odds are more in the favor that a gap will end up being filled. But again, you got to watch the charts, see when it happens. It could take days, weeks, months, or years, all depending on where price action is. So as you can see here, this is the S&P, the SPX was at a peak, and then I didn't look at the news that day. It doesn't really almost even really matter because it was so overextended. At some point, it had to pull back. And as you can see, here's a falling window, otherwise known as a gap. I'm going to show you here. If you draw lines right across here, you're going to see this price gapped down, leaving this gap. See this gap in the center here? That's an extremely important support and resistance areas. Traders are going to pay very close attention to the top and the bottom of that gap and everywhere in between. So price drops down, falls down here, and obviously it's doing its thing. And then you can see over here, right in between these two green candles is actually a gap up. So traders are going to pay very close attention to this. If price starts to get back up in this area again, they're going to pay very, very close attention to these areas. So now as this price gapped down, if price broaches it, now the bottom of that gap is resistance. The middle kind of becomes no man's land, meaning it can go up, it can fill it, it could go up partial way, fall back down. Got to watch price action. But when that price does eventually fill, then it's very important if you're going to be bullish on it, that price gets above that gap and keeps moving upwards, because that gap, that top of that gap, will now become support. So if it goes and fills and retests and fails, well, then it filled the gap and then it's going to go and do its thing. So the gap, very important in between, extremely important support and resistance areas. And you will see this on, I'm not going to say every stock chart, but chances are the majority of stock charts that you look at over a period of time will show some level or some area of type of a gap. Let me show you several other examples. We'll look at Apple. And you will see here, there's a rising one, so a gap up right here, right in the middle there. And let's go back to a falling one. Again, you're going to see them just pretty much everywhere. Gap right here, gap down, falling window. Look at this. Price falls, right? So I'm going to show you here. I have my lines extended out, forward and backwards. Price falls back down, leaving this very big gap. Price continues to fall, goes back up. Now look what happens. Extremely important. Price gets now resistance, right? Gets up into that gap where it now becomes very volatile, right? Look what happens. Now it's retesting this support area, the bottom of that gap, right? What happens? It failed, came back up, went, look at this, almost, 3/4 or half of the way into that gap, but it did not fill. See, the price didn't go up and fill that gap. Came back down, failed again, right? So now look. Look at this. Comes back up again, retest the areas, failed. So it's trying, see, very important. Traders are paying attention to all this gap, right? Weakness falls back down, boom. Now price goes up, fills that gap. What happens? It kind of failed back into the gap. Then it came back up, broke above the gap. Then look what happened. Doji off that gap, now bull flagging, and then it continued. So incredibly important these support and resistance areas. Gaps are incredibly important and critical support and resistance areas. So whether you want to call it gaps or rising window, falling window, so gaps are windows, kind of the same thing. And then you can kind of extend it forward and you'll see again, right? Price falls down back into that previous gap, right? So now that previous, this gap down comes back up, it's resistance, breaks above it, now it comes back down, and now it's support, fails into support. Green candle comes back in, price goes back up again, and then look, over and over and over again, these areas happen, especially on very big name stocks, like Apple and Google and Facebook and those ones, Happens on on the small caps as well, but I mean, so glaringly obvious on some of these major. Let's take a look at Facebook. Where is this one? Falling window. Oh, right here. So, as you can see, I'm going to put that like right here. Gap. See, this gapped down or falling down. So, falling window, gap down, whatever you want to call it. You can see this gap. Falls down. Price comes back up. Hits it. Fails. Retest. Doesn't make it. Retest again. Gets in there. Kind of fails. Now it goes and closes in that gap. Didn't close it. What did it do? Filled the gap, closed above. Then what happens? Come back and retest that gap. Fails right down in between. What happens next? Doji candle. Bounced off again. Went back up. Failed again into the gap, right? Came back down, retested the entire gap again, went back up, indecision mode, got back up, falls back down, fails the gap. Are you seeing this? So important, resistance and support areas. Incredibly important, these gaps. And you can just keep extending it forward, and you're going to see, look, price is coming down, goes back, retests it, fails. Goes up, back into the gap, fails. Goes back up into the gap, fails. So important that traders are really, really watching this area. Incredibly important. I hope you're getting this because these gaps are so important for support and resistance area. Let's look at a couple more examples. Netflix. Repetition is the key. Looking at this over and over and over again, that's how incredibly important it is. Let's go to, I'm going to just delete this right here. Let's go to falling window. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, there we go. Right here, right? So I'm going to draw a line in here. Here's the gap down or the falling window. It was down here and then it kind of, I guess I'll put it right here just for now. This window right here, right? Kind of was down here. Fell down, right? Price got back up. Kind of it's playing around this area here. It was failing it. And then it went back up. Look at this. Now look at all of this craziness that's happening all within this window. Look at this. Huge gap down, huge falling window. All of this. It's actually, you can see bull flagging all up within this window. Then once it breaks out, look, it breaks out of the window. Look at all of these wicks and dojis trying to, all this indecision, goes back up, comes back down, fails, up, fails, or retesting, up, comes back down into the gap, fails around, goes back up, right? And just keep watching this over and over and over. This window right here goes back up. What's it do? Comes back down, retests. Now you got a gap up. Boom. Over and over and over again, these gaps happen all of the time, especially on these major companies. So when you see a gap up or a gap down, pay very close attention to it because it's just going to keep going and, price is going to keep going back and retesting certain areas, and it's going to be very important support and resistance areas. Let's see here. We'll look at one or two more. AT&T. Falling window here. Right here. Gap down. Price falls all the way down. You can see another gap down right here, right? Price falls down. What's it do? Comes back up. Starts retesting that gap. Goes and fills. Look at all those wicks and shadows. Gets back above. What's it do? Comes right back up. Rejects off the base of that falling window. Falls back down. Goes back up. What's it do? It fills this window right here, fills that gap. What does it do now? Bounces around right inside that window, goes back up, retests it. What's it do? Goes back up again, falls back into the window. Smacks around a little bit, fails that window, goes back, retests that window, comes back down and fails, goes back up again, retests it, fails, over and over and over again. So important. These gaps, these rising windows, falling windows, gaps, windows, whatever it is, whatever you want to call them. It's really, people just are more familiar with it by calling a gap, but whatever you want to call it.